Okay, so I'm going to talk about product bundles for popular diets. And a lot of what I'm going to say is in line with a lot of what you've already heard today, okay? Now, let me preface this by saying that I'm going to talk about these popular diets. That does not mean that I or NeoLife endorse these diets, okay? So what I'm saying is, what we're going to talk about here is, if you are doing one of these eating strategies, then there are certain products that can benefit you, okay? That's all we're saying. So we'll talk a little more about what diets I think are valuable, what isn't valuable, and hopefully we'll learn some things here. So when we talk about weight loss, dieting, and how food impacts health and weight, there are lots of popular eating strategies that can lead to results, right? And when we talk about weight loss, when we say something works, a diet works, well, losing weight is actually pretty easy. Most people know how to do it. Where they fail is keeping it off, right? That's really the difficult part. So if you want to really lose weight, just don't eat, you'll lose weight. That's not that difficult, right? But that's not really a sustainable strategy, right? So we need to have a sustainable strategy that you can do basically forever if you want to have permanent change in body composition. Permanent changes in body composition or permanent changes in weight require permanent changes in behavior, okay? Every eating strategy has pros and cons, and we'll point out what some of those are. The thing to remember is that the more restrictive your eating strategy, the greater the risk of some nutritional deficiency. And the more restrictive your eating strategy, the less likely you are to do it long term, okay? Most popular eating strategies will create some type of nutritional gap that should be filled, okay? And even sensible, reasonable eating strategies still create these things. I mean, we know that people today, lots of people are walking around with no eating strategy whatsoever that are deficient in a lot of things, right? And those can be people who are overweight, still doesn't matter, right? If you're not eating the right stuff, doesn't matter how much of it you eat, you're going to have some type of deficiency. Now, before we talk about these specific diet and these bundles, I want to talk about these two products because I don't want you to think that these are add-on products to the diets that I'm going to be discussing. These are things that I think that everybody can benefit from, regardless of what eating strategy you are incorporating, okay? Elevate, you've heard a lot about Elevate today, about the nootropic elements in Elevate. There's really good stuff for the brain. And you know, if you've ever been on one of those, something like a low-carb diet or a low-calorie diet, you can get pretty nasty and pretty grumpy when you're on those kinds of things. These are the kinds of products that might assist with that. And UpBeet improves blood flow to tissue. And improving blood flow to tissue is probably the single most important thing that you can do to a tissue in order to keep it healthy. Blood brings nutrients, it brings oxygen, it removes waste products, it does all these things. And incidentally, Kendra, balding is caused by lack of blood flow to the hair follicle, which causes the hair follicle to atrophy and the hair to fall out. So, you know, I'm sort of getting a little thin here, so every day for the past year I've been mixing up a bottle of UpBeet and pouring it on my head and rubbing it in, but no effect yet. But it stands to reason, right? Not that you'd pour it on your head, but hair regrowth drugs are designed to improve blood flow to the follicle, right? So lots of drugs use some nitric oxide mediated mechanism to bring more blood flow to the tissue. So it's very, very important. So I would say that these are things, at a minimum, you should be using on a regular basis. So, well, before we get into the popular diets, I want to talk about the Mediterranean diet. Now, the Mediterranean diet is sort of ranked consistently as the healthiest way that one can eat, okay? And the Mediterranean diet, as you can see here, focuses on quality rather than a single nutrient or food group. So if you're like on a ketogenic diet, for example, you're going to eliminate all carbohydrate from the diet. And remember what I said about restriction. The more restrictive the eating plan, the less likely you are to stick to it long term. The Mediterranean diet is not restrictive. It doesn't say you can't eat this, you can't eat that, right? It's a variety. And because there's not that restriction, it makes it easy to stick to. And remember, I said any diet will help you lose weight as long as you stay in a calorie deficit. This type of eating pattern will help you stay in that calorie deficit because you're allowed to eat fiber and other things that fill you up and are satisfying, okay? So if you asked me which one of these eating strategies I would personally use, it's the Mediterranean diet. Now you'll notice here that, do I have a thing here? No? Do I have a pointer? Not working? Okay. At the bottom here, you'll see it says plant-based, gluten-free, and vegan. It doesn't have to be that, but you can make it that way. You can eat a Mediterranean diet that is plant-based, gluten-free, and vegan, but it doesn't necessarily have to be that way. So I looked up a review article just because that was in US News and World Report, which isn't very scientific, so I figured I would pull up a review article looking at the Mediterranean diet. Better conformity with the traditional Mediterranean diet is associated with better cardiovascular health outcomes, including clinically meaningful reductions in stroke, heart disease, coronary problems. So what that means is the more you eat this way, the Mediterranean way, the less likely you are to experience any of these cardiovascular problems. This is a review article from 2019. So consistently, the Mediterranean diet has been shown to be the healthiest way to eat, all right? And that would be what we would endorse, or what I would endorse. Okay, and this is sort of what that looks like. And you can remember from Liz's talk, she was talking about the importance of grains and fiber and fruits and vegetables, good fats. All those things are at the base, are basically at the foundation. But you'll notice that towards the top of the pyramid, you see things like eggs, cheese, poultry, yogurt, daily to weekly, and then small amounts of red meat. So animal products are absolutely included in the Mediterranean diet on a regular basis. Okay? So these are the eating strategies that we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about vegan and vegetarianism, ketogenic or low-carb diets. We'll talk about intermittent fasting, and finally we'll talk about paleo or carnivore, those type of meat-based diets. Okay, so first let's talk about vegan and vegetarian. Now remember, as we go through this, remember what I said in the beginning. Ask yourself, how restrictive is this way to eat? Is a vegan diet restrictive? Yeah, it's very restrictive, right? Because you're saying you can't eat anything that has an animal product in it. That eliminates a lot of foods that you can eat. Now, if you talk to most vegans, my daughters are both vegan. If you talk to vegans, they'll say, well, there's lots of things I can eat. Yeah, that's true. But there's not nearly as many things you can eat as if you weren't vegan, right? So you have to realize and accept the fact that a vegan diet is a very restrictive way to eat, and you are likely to have nutritional gaps because of it, okay? Now, that doesn't mean that it's a bad way to eat. If everybody in the United States took up a vegan diet, the population would become much, much more healthy, right? But that doesn't mean that on the individual level, there aren't certain things that are missing, okay? A vegan diet, potentially, you have low protein intake, right? If you are only eating protein from or from plant sources, that is potentially going to be a problem for you, okay? The protein is of low biological quality. You know, the only complete plant-based protein is soy. So if you're eating other types of plant-based protein, you're not getting all the amino acids that are necessary to make that a complete protein, okay? Low energy intake due to low calorie intake, micronutrient deficiencies just due to a limited variety of what you eat. So what products would be helpful for this? And again, when I put these bundles up here, don't think that you need to be taking everything on here. These are just products that will help with this eating style, okay? Vegan protein, that should be obvious, right? If you're a vegan and we're talking about the importance of protein, eat the vegan protein, right? Okay. This is a biologically complete protein, meaning it has all the amino acids in it. So this is a very good product to be taken if you're a vegan. Vegan D, vitamin D. We've talked about vitamin D. You've heard that quite a bit, right? Most Americans are deficient in vitamin D, just all of them in general, whether you're trying to get it or not. So that's obvious one. There aren't a whole lot of vegan multivitamin options, but Vita-Squares here is not, technically it's not vegan because the vitamin D is from lanolin, which comes from sheep, but the sheep aren't killed or harmed or in any way. So, you know, if you're a vegan, but you're, that might be okay for you, right? And then finally, the NeoLife bars, 17 vitamin minerals, 100% vegan, 10 grams of protein, 5 grams of fiber. These are great things to be eating if this is if veganism is where you're at, okay? So let's talk about the ketogenic diet, the belle of the ball. So ketogenic diets and very low carbohydrate diets, there's a significant difference between the two. With a ketogenic diet, you're eating really, really low carbohydrate, less than 50 grams a day, but you're eating enormous amounts of fat, 75 to 80% of your calories from fat, okay? Now, that's pretty gross if you've ever tried to do that. There's not a whole lot of things to eat. So again, is that restrictive? Yeah. 75% of your calories from fat? Yeah, that's restrictive, right? Now, unless you love just walking around drinking olive oil, then you know, that's going to be difficult to stick to long term. And that is the biggest problem with ketogenic diets, is people just can't stick to them long term. So a sort of modified version of that are low carbohydrate diets, which actually can make a lot of sense. I mean, it's probably the case that Americans eat too many carbohydrates, especially processed carbohydrates. But it's also the case that we eat too much fat, we eat too much food, okay? So very low carbohydrate diets, it makes sense probably to remove some carbohydrate from your diet. But again, this leads to issues. And depending on how much carbohydrate you remove, that determines the severity of these issues. So if you are somebody who does a ketogenic diet, you can expect things like constipation, fatigue, stomach cramps, headaches, problems with the gut microbiome, micronutrient deficiencies, right? Because think about it. If you tried to put together a diet where you were eating 80% of your calories from fat with less than 50 grams of carb, there's like 6 things you can eat, right? It's very difficult to do. It's very difficult to do because not only that, you can't go over 10 to 15% of your calories from protein because then you'll start converting that protein into carbohydrate and it kicks you out of ketosis. So you can't even eat a lot of protein on a ketogenic diet. So it's extremely limiting. So there's so many products that would help this that I didn't put descriptions under them because I wouldn't have fit it on the page. But so I'll break this up into a couple different slides here. So probably the first thing, fiber, right? Liz talked about the importance of fiber. And where does fiber come from? It comes from plants. And what are plants? Plants are carbohydrates. Well, if I'm not eating any carbohydrates, it's going to be hard for me to get fiber, right? So fiber's a great option. Pro-vitality, right? Carotenoids from fruits and vegetables. Again, low-carb diet, you're probably not eating a whole lot of fruits and vegetables. So these things would be beneficial for you. Acidophilus Plus is going to help the gut, right? The gut microbiome likes variety. You just start feeding it oil and mayonnaise, it's not going to like that, right? Lipotropic adjunct, you know, this helps prevent fat buildup on artery walls and in the liver. And if you're eating 80% of your calories from fat, we don't really know the long-term effects of eating ketogenic diets. The ketogenic diet was designed to prevent seizures in children. It's decades old. It was designed to prevent seizures. It was a short-term solution to prevent seizures prior to anti-seizure medication. And somebody along the way figured out, I might lose weight if I eat this way. And as a result of that, the ketogenic diet now becomes popular. Okay, extremely difficult to stick to. Vegan, the sport performance protein has a slightly lower carb compared to the NeoLifeShake. So you will be wanting to get protein in these types of diets. So this would be a good option for that. And then finally, the enzyme digestive aid. This helps optimal digestion, which again, if you're eating a diet, especially if you go from if you're eating a normal mixed macronutrient diet, and then one day you just decide, I'm gonna go keto, and you're just gonna start eating 80% of your calories from fat and remove all those carbohydrates, that is gonna cause some gastro distress, for sure, okay? Okay, intermittent fasting and time-restricted feeding. So, most people use these terms interchangeably, or actually most people just call everything intermittent fasting. Technically, intermittent fasting is when you are fasting for more than 24 hours at a time, or a minimum of 24 hours at a time. And some people will actually do sort of 48, some people will do a 5-day eating, 2 days fasting, okay? That's intermittent fasting, as opposed to time-restricted feeding. Time-restricted feeding is when you have the specific time window that you're allowed to eat in. So like maybe I say, okay, I'm only gonna eat between noon and 5. But from noon to 5, I can eat whatever I want, ad lib, okay? And this will generally work as far as weight loss, but why does it work? It works because if you say to yourself, I'm gonna eat as much as I want during these 5 hours, you will fill up and you won't be able to eat as much as you would if you just ate over a normal day, right? Like if I sit down at noon, we went to Ruth's Chris last night. There is a 40-ounce tomahawk ribeye. I wanted to get this thing so bad, but I probably would have got a phone call, spending too much money. But the thing was 3,200 calories. It was written on there, 3,200 calories, right? So let's say I'm doing intermittent fasting, and I go down for lunch at Ruth's Chris and I eat a 3,200 calorie ribeye. I'm probably not eating anything for the rest of those 5 hours, right? I'm probably not going to be hungry at 5 o'clock when my window's open. So in that situation, well, that's not really a great example because it's 3,200 calories, but let's say it was 1,500. The New York strip was 1,500, which is what I did get. So if you eat 1,500 calories, maybe in that other 5-hour period, I'm only gonna eat 200 more. So now you're at 1,700. That's fewer calories than you would eat if you just woke up at 8 o'clock and ate normally throughout the day. Now, the thing to remember is if you take that same 1,700 calories that you ate in 5 hours and spread it out over 20 hours, the weight loss is exactly the same. Okay, so the only benefit of time-restricted feeding is you eat less. That's it. Now, there is some evidence that it can help with glucose control and things like that in diabetics, but that's beyond the scope of this. But there are problems that potentially can be associated with this, particularly if you're doing the fasting and not the time-restricted feeding. So, let's take the steak example. If I only have that 5 hours and I go and I eat a 16-ounce New York strip that might have 60 or 70 grams of protein in it, that's great, but that's still not meeting my protein goal for the day, okay? And as Liz said, protein goals are individualized. So you need to understand that if you are on these types of diets, if you are on time-restricted feeding diet and your daily protein need comes out to 160, but you're only getting 80, that's gonna be a problem. And if you're doing fasting, where you have a 24-hour period, remember when Liz said that muscle is always being generated? That's true. It's also always being broken down. And your muscle, your net muscle, how much muscle you have is sort of the net result of those two. We want the production of muscle to be greater than the breakdown, right? With this intermittent fasting, if you're going 24 hours, you're waking up catabolic because you haven't eaten all night. You're waking up in a catabolic state, your muscles are breaking down, and now you're not gonna feed them for 24 hours? Doesn't make sense. Your muscles are made of protein. They are literally made of protein. If you don't provide that protein through the diet, where does your muscle get that protein from? It gets it from itself. If you are not feeding yourself protein, your muscles are going to start, your legs are going to say, I need amino acids. Let's break down the upper body and send the amino acids down there. And that happens all over the body. And what happens? Your muscle starts to shrink. You start to atrophy and go away because you're not giving more amino acids through the diet. So with time-restricted feeding, obviously, we're going to have the protein, right? This is important. And the important thing about this is you're getting 18 grams of protein in the shake in only 140 calories, right? So it may be easy to slam a bunch of these things and get a bunch of protein without really getting a huge caloric load, right? Glucose balance, this helps to support glucose levels and keep them stable in the body, which aren't going to be stable if you're only allowing yourself to eat 4 hours out of the day, right? You're going to get this spike, this insulin spike, that's going to cause this spike in glucose, that's then going to go away, okay? And then finally, Pro-Vitality will help you get all those things that you're probably not going to be eating during that 5-hour window. Because think about this, if you're in a time-restricted feeding type of eating pattern, and during that 5 hours, you decide you're going to eat a whole bunch of fruit and vegetables, that may not be the smartest thing to do, right? Because what is that fruit, those cruciferous types of foods with all that fiber, they're going to fill you up. And if those things fill you up and now you don't feel like eating chicken or protein or one of those other things, now you got a lot of fiber, but you didn't get a very big calorie load, you didn't get a high protein load, you're going to end up being hungry, you're going to end up being catabolic because your muscles aren't going to be fed, okay? So, we want to eat fruits and vegetables, but in this situation, that's going to hamper us because we won't be able to eat these things that are high, that have these high protein content. Protein is very satisfying, it fills you up. So after you eat a bunch of fruits and vegetables, the last thing you're going to want to do is go and eat a steak, okay? So Pro-Vitality takes care of that. You're getting those carotenoids and you're getting all the good stuff that's in those plants and those fruits and vegetables just by taking those supplements. Okay, the last one we'll talk about is Paleo or Primal or Carnivore or some derivation of that. And these things are largely based, the logic is that if you eat like Paleolithic people did, I don't know who came up with this, by the way, but if you eat like Paleolithic people did, then that's good because you're not eating anything processed. And the idea is that these people were eating foods before industrialized farming and all this other whatever. So there's problems that go along with this, right? And the other thing is, these people had a lifespan. They lived to the ripe old age of like 30. So, I don't know why, how people are worried about chronic disease eating a paleo diet when nobody died from chronic diseases. And back then, you were dead by the time you were 30. So anyway, if you are going to eat a diet that consists primarily of meat, then obviously that's going to have micronutrient deficiencies that go along with that, right? You're going to have energy availability problems. The body, as a fuel source, loves to burn carbohydrate and it loves to burn fat. It likes to burn carb more than fat, but protein is not a fuel source for muscle. It's not supposed to be, okay? Some organs use protein for energy. The gut uses organ, the liver uses protein, amino acids for energy, but the muscles don't. And it shouldn't be used for energy. So if you're only eating meat, you're giving yourself fat for fuel, which is good, but the brain can't burn fat. The brain can only burn carb. So if you're giving yourself all of these meat-based products and not eating any carb, that's going to lead to problems with energy availability, brain fog, all the things that go along with low-carb eating. So most of these things you've seen before, right? Fiber, you're not getting fiber if you're eating a carnivore diet. You're probably going to have some type of gut microbiome issues because you're not eating any carbohydrate, you're just eating meat. Pro-Vitality takes the place of all those fruits and vegetables that you're not eating. And then Lipotropic Adjunct, as we said before, helps prevent fat buildup. If you're eating a carnivore or a paleo diet, you're eating a lot of fat, right? There's no getting around it. And then finally, the digestive aid will help with any of those issues that you have related to eating these high meat diets or any type of high protein diet. I mean, you know, I'm sure many of you have tried to eat 200 plus grams, somewhere around there. You don't want to be in an elevator with that person, you know, who's eating 200 grams of protein, right? It's rough. It's tough on you. It's tough on you. So you know, when people say how much protein you eat, I say, eat as much as you can handle or as much as your spouse can handle you eating, right? So, you know, that's just, there's no getting around it. Okay, so if I had to sum this up, all eating strategies can benefit from some type of nutritional supplementation. No question about it. This is probably the most important thing to remember. The greater the degree of dietary restriction, the greater the need for supplementation. And think about it. When I put up the ketogenic diet, which I would say is the most restrictive, that one had the most products up there, right? Right. So you run the risk of having the greatest nutritional deficiencies when the diet is at its greatest level of restriction, whatever eating style that is. And finally, while all these different diets can lead to improved health, and honestly, most diets will lead to improved health solely through the fact that they make you lose fat. Fat itself, body fat, is inflammatory. And when you lose fat, markers of cardiometabolic health go up, regardless of how you lose that fat. But that does not mean that that's the optimal way to lose that fat, okay? So still, the Mediterranean diet is the least restrictive. And as we said, in order to lose weight, you must create a calorie deficit. You have to create a calorie deficit. Why does time-restricted feeding work? Because you eat less throughout the day. Why does a ketogenic diet work? Ketogenic diets work because when you are actually in ketosis, you don't get hungry. It removes your hunger. So if I'm only eating 1,000 calories a day and it's, you know, oil and steak, I'm not going to be hungry if I'm in ketosis. But that's not necessarily a good thing, right? Hunger is a signal that tells you I need fuel. I think when you're in a ketosis state, it's a protective mechanism because the body's thinking, well, I don't have any food around or you'd be eating it, so I'm just going to make you not hungry. So the Mediterranean diet is the one where you can eat in a caloric deficit but still have the greatest amount of variety and still check all your boxes in terms of protein consumption, fruit and vegetable consumption, fiber consumption. None of that is restricted, okay? So when you're picking an eating strategy, pick one that doesn't have a lot of rules, right? The ones that have a lot of rules are the ones that are the hardest to stick to. Anything that's hard to stick to is not going to be sustainable. I always tell people, if they're trying to lose weight, think about what you're doing right now to try and lose weight. If you can't picture yourself doing this for the rest of your life, quit and do something else, because you won't be successful. 100% of the time, you won't be successful. It must be something that results in a permanent change, right? Permanent changes in body composition require permanent changes in behavior. Dig? All right.